I want to share with you why I think the church has a very unique opportunity right now. It's an opportunity to make God's kingdom a bit more of a reality here on earth. In order to do that, I first need to explain how I see the enemy is currently at work in our world. Now, it's sometimes easy to see where the deceiver's at work. Certainly, we see it with the deception and destruction through abortion on demand, through the transgender issue that's being pushed on our children, and with our open borders that not only ignores our laws, but allows human trafficking and drug smuggling to flourish. At the same time, it's also easy to see that this enemy uses people in his deceit and destruction. Just like God uses people to bring about his purposes here on earth, the enemy imitates God's plan and uses those who are willing, or those he can deceive, to work against God's kingdom. What I think the church oftentimes misses is that the enemy uses many of the same people in all of his work against the kingdom. I'm sure if you stop and think about it, you've seen this yourself. Someone who supports abortion on demand very likely supports gender-affirming care for children, open borders, and the Hamas terrorists over Israel. Recognizing this can act as a warning sign for the church. While these people are not our enemy, because they so consistently follow our enemy's plans, they then become a reliable indicator for where our enemy is currently at work. And this is the group that is pushing the climate change agenda here in America and around the world. Because of this association, the church ought to be diligent in examining their claims and their solutions. The more I look into this, the more deception and destruction I become aware of. The deceit seems most obvious in the claim that we can replace fossil fuels with wind turbines, solar panels, and batteries. Experts in these fields know that this is not remotely possible, and yet this is the lie that is told over and over again to support this agenda. And this lie should prompt us to look with greater skepticism at their initial claims about global warming and climate change. Doing so certainly causes reasons to doubt what they say. At a minimum, their claims place man at the center of the universe, able to control the climate and the weather, rather than there being a creator whose words can command the winds and the sea. Based on these falsehoods, our freedoms are eroded and our standard of living is diminished. We are forced to accept mining and processing of materials overseas that depend on the use of slavery and forced labor. We're forced into further dependence on the Chinese Communist Party, since they control most of these natural resources. Dependence on a country that is easily the greatest threat to freedom around the world, and which already denies religious freedom and free speech to its millions of citizens, many of whom are also imprisoned or killed because of those religious beliefs. Dependence on the country that unleashed the COVID virus, which the enemy then used to force an experimental vaccine on us and to close our businesses and our churches. And then we're forced to abandon our own fossil fuel resources, even before we have a viable alternative source of energy. This forces us to depend on other nations for our energy needs, including Russia and Iran. What Russia does with this added funding is in the news daily, while Iran funds terrorists, including those who attacked Israel on October 7th. Ultimately, because of this agenda, we are funding those terrorists. I could continue, but certainly you can see how this agenda is based on deception and lies, and that it leads to death and destruction. This clearly places its origin with the father of lies, just like abortion and the other attacks against God's kingdom. And that brings me to my final and main point. The church needs to be wise about how it opposes this enemy. Part of that wisdom involves choosing the best battlefield. Right now, our most advantageous battlefield is against the climate change agenda. Why is that? Well, because this is a battle that can be won without depending on people outside the church. All of these other battles, like abortion and our open borders, require changing the hearts, minds, and actions of people outside the church. We should certainly be attempting to do this, but the church itself can do very little to end abortion or close our nation's open borders. But the battle against climate change can be won from within the church. As I said earlier, this agenda is based on the lie that wind and solar can provide all of our energy needs. But wind and solar require huge amounts of land, with a large portion of that land owned by people who are in our churches. People who are already sitting in our pews, actively seeking God's voice and direction, can expose this lie and stop this evil from continuing. Without the permission of Christian landowners, there's not enough land available for these large wind and solar farms. This is true locally, across our state, and across our country. That's why this battle is such a unique opportunity for the church, and why we need church leaders to amplify this message. Within our church walls, we have the capability to reveal the true evil behind this agenda and the ability to spare people everywhere from its death and destruction. When we look back in time, we are rightly critical of past church leaders who remained quiet when faced with an obvious evil. We certainly saw this happen in Nazi Germany, and we saw it again before our Civil War, where church leaders either chose to be quiet or even participated in the evil of their day. I pray that we've learned from their past mistakes and understand that we in the church need to speak and act before it's too late.